The night air in Boise cut sharper than glass. Snowflakes fell in a steady curtain, hushing the streets and layering rooftops in shimmering white. Christmas Eve was supposed to carry warmth candles in windows, the smell of cinnamon drifting from kitchens, the echo of carols on radios, but for Deborah Harris, 45 years old, broad-shouldered and heavy-set from years of comfort eating and hard work, it was just another night of restless worry. Deborah's boots crunched across the icy driveway as she approached the Whitlock residence. Her thick coat, a quilted navy jacket, ballooned around her frame. But even that couldn't keep the chill from biting at her cheeks. She was nervous, her breath quickening into puffs of white steam. She hadn't told her daughter Emily she was coming. After months of unanswered calls and one-word text replies, Deborah couldn't sit still any longer. Something inside her mother's intuition, the kind that gnaws at you until you obey, driven her to buy a last-minute ticket, pack a bag, and show up uninvited. Emily, 23, had been married barely a year to Ryan Whitlock, the golden boy of a wealthy Idaho family. On paper, it looked like a dream match: handsome husband, sprawling suburban home, a future of security. But the last few phone calls told another story. Emily's voice had sounded thin, stripped of its usual spark. There were pauses where laughter used to be, and though she insisted everything was fine, Deborah knew her daughter well enough to hear the fracture lines. As she reached the porch, Deborah heard laughter ripple from inside light, carefree, coolly indifferent to the cold storm outside. Through the wide picture window, she saw the Whitlocks gathered around a table set with golden chargers and polished wine glasses. A fire snapped in the stone hearth, reflecting off Evelyn Whitlock's pearls and Abigail's sequined dress. Ryan stood at the head of the table, his blonde hair slicked back, raising a toast. Deborah clenched her fists in her pockets. It was a scene from a Christmas commercial, all warmth and wealth and belonging. But something was missing. Emily. Deborah's chest tightened. She scanned the window again, craning her neck, looking for her daughter's familiar frame, her soft curls, her timid smile. Nothing. She was about to knock on the front door when a faint sound reached her ears, a muffled cough carried by the wind. Deborah turned toward the side of the house. There, barely visible against the drifted snow, was a figure huddled in a wicker chair on the patio. Her heart stopped. It was Emily. She was wrapped in nothing but a thin cardigan, damp from the snow. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her face pale, lips trembling, a faint shade of blue. Her curly hair clung wet against her forehead. She looked like a discarded doll, left behind while everyone else feasted inside. Deborah dropped her overnight bag and ran. "Emily," she whispered, her voice breaking as she crouched beside her daughter. She pulled off her gloves and pressed her hands to Emily's icy cheeks. "Baby, what are you doing out here? You'll freeze." Emily's eyelids fluttered, her voice hoarse. "Mom, what are you?" A shiver racked her body. "They said I was making a scene. Too much negativity at Christmas dinner, so they told me to sit outside until I could behave." The words sliced Deborah deeper than the cold ever could. She hugged Emily against her, wrapping the thick quilted jacket around both of them. Rage boiled in her veins, hotter than any fireplace flame. How dare they? Enough, Deborah muttered, lifting her daughter's frail body with surprising strength. "You're coming inside, right now." As she staggered toward the French doors, the laughter inside grew louder, a cruel counterpoint to the suffering in her arms. Deborah kicked the door open with her boot. The room fell silent, silverware clinking against porcelain as startled eyes turned toward her. Every head at the table swiveled: Evelyn with her arched brows, Gregory Whitlock with his glass of wine frozen midair, Abigail with her painted smirk, and Ryan, whose expression flickered between embarrassment and annoyance. The golden family tableau fractured at the protrusion. Deborah's voice thundered through the dining room. "Why is my daughter freezing outside while you're in here toasting by the fire?" Her words echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The smell of roasted turkey and spiced cider turned sour in her nostrils. She didn't care that she looked disheveled, snow melting in her hair, jacket dragging across the polished floor. All that mattered was the limp weight of Emily in her arms. Evelyn recovered first, her tone icy. "Deborah, what an unexpected surprise. Perhaps we can discuss this later." "You're interrupting dinner." "Later," Deborah barked. She laid Emily down gently on a couch, then turned, fists planted on her hips. "She's hypothermic. You left her outside like a dog." Ryan stood, his jaw tightening. "She was overreacting. Always does. Mom just suggested she take some air to calm down. She could have come back in whenever she wanted." "Air?" Deborah snapped. "It's 32 degrees out there." Emily tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too violently. Deborah pulled a blanket from the armrest, tucking it around her. The sight of her daughter's suffering ignited something primal. She turned back toward the table, her eyes blazing. "You should be ashamed of yourselves," she spat. "Every single one of you." The Whitlocks exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one moved to help. The fire popped in the hearth, mocking the silence. Abigail sipped her wine and muttered, "Drama, as always." Deborah's chest rose and fell. She could feel the night splintering into two halves before she saw her daughter abandoned in the snow, and after. She didn't know what battles lay ahead, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Emily wasn't safe here, and Deborah Harris was done being silent. The silence in the Whitlock living room pressed as heavily as the snowstorm outside. Deborah could hear only Emily's ragged breaths under the blanket and the hiss of firewood spitting sparks in the hearth. Her heart thundered, but her voice carried with a clarity sharpened by fury. "You all sat here feasting," Deborah said, sweeping her arm at the golden table gleaming with candlelight, "while my daughter nearly froze to death outside your door." Evelyn Whitlock, regal in a satin blouse and pearls that glinted in the firelight, didn't flinch. "Don't exaggerate, Deborah." She needed to collect herself. "Our family values harmony during the holidays." Emily was upsetting the mood. Deborah laughed bitterly, a harsh sound that startled even herself. "Harmony? You call exile harmony?" Ryan shoved his chair back, the scrape of wood on hardwood piercing the air. "Stop twisting it, Mom. You're blowing everything out of proportion. Emily just doesn't handle pressure well." Emily stirred, her lips trembling. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her husband didn't turn. Deborah knelt to brush damp curls from Emily's forehead, then glared up at Ryan. "Pressure? You married her, you vowed to protect her, and now you stand here while your family treats her like she stopped herself." Her throat closing on the word trash. Abigail, Ryan's sister, crossed her legs elegantly, swirling her wine. Her eyes were icy and amused. "Maybe if Emily wasn't so dramatic, we wouldn't have to correct her behavior. Some women just aren't cut out for our family's expectations." "Expectations," Deborah snapped, "like obedience, silence, or maybe producing grandchildren on command." A sharp intake of breath went around the table. Emily flinched, pulling the blanket tighter. Deborah cursed herself silently. She hadn't meant to expose that wound. For miscarriages in 12 months. Each loss had hollowed Emily's spirit until she barely resembled the confident young woman who once dreamed of becoming a teacher. Deborah had spent sleepless nights crying into her pillow hundreds of miles away, helpless as her daughter grieved. And now she understood. Emily hadn't just been grieving, she had been enduring cruelty in silence. Evelyn's lips tightened. "It's no secret, Deborah. Ryan deserves heirs. It's tragic. Emily can't fulfill that role, but we've been patient." Deborah surged to her feet, her body shaking, not from cold but from rage that clawed up her spine. She towered over the table, her figure broad and imposing in the flickering firelight. "Patient." Her voice cracked, then roared. "You call mocking her pain patience? You people disgust me." Gregory Whitlock, Ryan's father, finally spoke. His voice was measured, the weight of a man used to boardrooms and power plays. "You've overstepped. This is our home, our family dinner. You were not invited. Emily knows the standards she agreed to when she married into this family. If she can't keep up, perhaps she doesn't belong here." Emily whimpered softly, curling into herself. Deborah squeezed her hand. "Don't listen to them, baby. You do belong, just not here. Not with people who treat you like property." Ryan's jaw tightened, his face coloring with embarrassment. "You don't get it, Mom. You've always babied her. That's why she's weak. She needs to toughen up." "Toughen up." Deborah spat the words like venom. "She's survived miscarriages, isolation, and your family's cruelty, and she's still standing. That's not weakness, Ryan. That's strength. More strength than any of you could ever muster sitting in your ivory tower." Abigail rolled her eyes. "God, the dramatics. Maybe you should audition for a courtroom speech." "Maybe I should," Deborah shot back, her gaze cutting like steel, "because what I've seen tonight borders on abuse, and I won't stand for it." For the first time, unease flickered across the Whitlocks' polished faces. Evelyn smoothed her pearls, her eyes narrowing. "You dare accuse us, in our home, on Christmas Eve?" "Yes," Deborah said firmly. "I dare." Emily clutched her mother's sleeve. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried. "Mom, please, don't make it worse." Deborah knelt beside her again, cupping her face gently. "Sweetheart, it's already worse, and I won't leave you here another second." Ryan stepped forward, blocking the doorway. His broad shoulders filled the frame, his expression hard. She's not going anywhere tonight. This is her home now. She belongs with me. Deborah straightened slowly, squaring herself against him. She was shorter, heavier, middle-aged, but she had the weight of a mother's fury behind her. Her eyes locked on his without flinching. Step aside, Ryan, or you'll regret it. The fire crackled, casting jagged shadows across the walls. No one moved. For a heartbeat, the room hung and balanced the Whitlock's power. Deborah's defiance, Emily's fragile life caught in between. Then, in the distance, a sound broke the silence. Church bells chiming midnight, announcing Christmas Day. Deborah felt the weight of the moment settle. Asterisk, a new day, a line drawn. Asterisk, she would not back down. Not tonight, not ever again. She slipped her arms under Emily and lifted her once more. Her knees nearly buckled with the effort, but she held steady, glaring at Ryan. Last chance move. His nostrils flared. For a tense second, Deborah thought he might fight her. But then, Evelyn's sharp voice cut through. Let her go, Ryan. If she wants to parade her daughter out in the snow like some martyr, let her. It will only prove our point. Ryan hesitated, then stepped aside. His eyes, however, promised retribution. Deborah carried Emily toward the door, her breath ragged, her heart thundering with adrenaline. She didn't look back. Not at the feast, not at the fire, not at the people who had tried to break her daughter's spirit. The door swung wide, and the storm swallowed them whole. Outside, snow stung her cheeks, but Deborah held Emily tighter, whispering into her hair, I've got you, baby. They'll never hurt you again. But deep in her chest, she knew the battle was only beginning. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. But to Deborah, it was a sanctuary. She lowered Emily carefully onto the stiff mattress, pulled the scratchy blanket over her, and then sat on the edge, catching her breath. Her arms ached from carrying her daughter through the storm, but she refused to let Emily see her weakness. Tonight demanded strength. Emily's eyelids fluttered open. In the dim glow of the bedside lamp, her face looked pale, almost translucent. Her lips were still tinged blue, her hands trembling beneath the covers. Mom, she whispered, her voice hoarse, you shouldn't have come. Deborah brushed damp curls from Emily's forehead, her heart breaking at the fragility beneath her touch. I had to come. Something told me you weren't safe, and I was right. Emily shook her head weakly. It's not what you think. They're just strict. They want things their way, and sometimes I disappoint them. Strict. Deborah's voice cracked, then rose. Emily, they left you outside in freezing weather. That's not strict, that's cruelty. You could have died. Tears filled Emily's eyes. She turned her face toward the wall, ashamed. Maybe it's my fault. I ruin everything. I can't give Ryan what he wants, and I keep failing. Maybe I deserved it. The words hit Deborah like a knife. She cupped Emily's chin and forced her to look into her eyes. Don't you ever say that again. You are not a failure. You've been through hell, and you're still here. That makes you stronger than any of them. Emily's tears spilled over. But they say I'm broken. Deborah swallowed hard, her fury tightening into resolve. Then they're liars, and we'll prove it. For a long time, silence hung between them. The hum of the heater filled the void, thawing the chill from Emily's bones. Deborah stroked her daughter's hand until Emily's breathing steadied and her eyes closed. When she finally drifted to sleep, Deborah sat rigid, staring at the cracked plaster ceiling. She felt the weight of a storm larger than the one outside pressing down on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Ryan. The name lit up the screen, bright and venomous. Deborah's jaw tightened. She answered, Where are you? Ryan's voice snapped through the line. You think you can just steal my wife away in the middle of the night? Bring her back, now. Deborah kept her voice low but firm. She's safe with me. She's not coming back there. She belongs here, Ryan growled. She's my wife. You have no right. You lost that right the second you abandoned her outside. Deborah shot back. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. There was a pause, then laughter cold, cruel. You think anyone will believe you? Everyone knows Emily's unstable. She's been seeing therapists for years. Who do you think they'll trust? My family, with our name and reputation, or the desperate mother clinging to fairy tales? Deborah's stomach twisted. His words carried the chill of truth. The Whitlocks had power, money, influence. They could spin this however they wanted, but she couldn't let him hear her fear. We'll see, she said, and hung up. She sat for a long moment, staring at the phone, her hands trembling. Shadows stretched across the room, thrown by the flickering neon sign outside. Deborah knew Ryan wasn't bluffing. He would come for Emily, and he wouldn't come alone. A knock rattled the door. Deborah froze, her heart pounding. It was too soon. He couldn't have found them already. She grabbed the chair from the desk and wedged it under the handle. "Who is it?" she demanded. A pause. Then, a low voice. "Mrs. Harris, it's Jake. Jake Turner." Deborah blinked, startled. She hadn't heard that name in years. Jake had been one of her students back when she taught at the community college. A lanky boy with restless energy, now grown into a man whose voice carried weariness. She cracked the door open, keeping the chain locked. "Jake," she whispered. He stood in the hallway, snow clinging to his jacket, his dark hair wet and eyes tired. "I saw you leave the Whitlock's place. I had to come. You need to know something." Deborah's instincts screamed against trust, but something in Jake's eyes, desperation, maybe fear, made her hesitate. She opened the door wider. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Jake stepped inside, glancing toward the sleeping Emily. His face softened, but his voice was urgent. "Mrs. Harris, the Whitlocks, they don't just control Ryan, they control the whole town, the banks, the lawyers, even half the cops. If you're planning to fight them, you can't do it alone." Deborah's pulse raced. "Then help me. Tell me everything." Jake nodded slowly, his jaw set. "But once you hear it, there's no turning back." Outside, the storm howled against the windows. Inside, the shadows deepened. And Deborah knew the night was only beginning. The next morning arrived, gray and bitter, the motel curtains leaking pale light into the cramped room. Deborah woke with a start, her back stiff from sitting upright in the chair beside Emily's bed. She had dozed only in fragments, each noise from the hallway jolting her awake with dread that Ryan, or worse, his parents, had tracked them down. Emily stirred, her lashes heavy against her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, she seemed to rest without trembling. Deborah brushed a hand over her daughter's curls, then pulled the blanket tighter. "Sleep while you can, baby," she thought. "Because the war is coming." Jake Turner sat at the small table, nursing a paper cup of coffee. His eyes were rimmed red, but sharp with determination. He had stayed through the night, recounting stories that turned Deborah's stomach. Whispers of missing staff who had once worked for the bank accounts swallowed by fees that mysteriously enriched Gregory's company. Police reports that vanished after crossing Evelyn's desk at the county clerk's office. The Whitlock's power, sprawling like roots of an old oak, was buried everywhere in Boise. "You don't fight them head-on," Jake said, voice rough. "Not if you want to win. You collect proof, piece by piece, and you keep it hidden until the moment they least expect it." Deborah crossed her arms, her broad shoulders filling the space. "Then we start today." Jake hesitated. "There's risk, Mrs. Harris. They'll retaliate if they sense even a whisper of betrayal. They're watching everyone, including me. I've already lost jobs because I asked the wrong questions. You'll lose more than that." Deborah's voice was steady. "I nearly lost my daughter last night. I've got nothing else left to lose." Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the heater. Jake finally nodded. "All right, then, we move carefully." By mid-afternoon the snow eased, leaving the city blanketed in deceptive calm. Deborah borrowed Jake's truck to drive Emily to a clinic on the edge of town. The doctor, a kind woman with kind eyes, confirmed what Deborah already feared: mild hypothermia, severe stress, malnutrition. Emily needed rest, therapy, and freedom from the toxic environment she'd endured. When Emily fell asleep in the clinic's quiet room, Deborah stepped into the hallway to call her sister back in Chicago. Her voice cracked as she explained everything, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Her sister begged her to come home, to leave Idaho behind, to escape while she still could. Deborah wanted to say yes, but the image of Emily curled on that patio chair burned too vividly. Running would only give the Whitlocks victory, and Emily deserved more than survival. She deserved justice. That evening, Jake spread folders across the motel table, photocopied invoices, pay stubs, and faded photographs. He spoke quickly, like a man racing against an invisible clock. "These are breadcrumbs, not enough to nail them, but enough to show a pattern. We'll need more bank statements, recordings, testimonies." Deborah leaned forward, studying the papers, numbers blurred, but her gut told her they were important. "Where do we start?" Jake's jaw tightened. "At the source, Ryan." The name sent a shiver down Deborah's spine. "You think he'll talk?" Jake shook his head. "Not willingly, but men like him, they brag when they feel untouchable. If we catch him in the right moment, we'll get what we need." Deborah clenched her fists. recalling Ryan's smirk, his dismissive tone, the way Emily's shoulders curled under his gaze. Then we'll make him slip. Later that night, Deborah stepped outside for air. Snow crunched under her boots, the neon sign buzzing faintly above. The cold slapped her cheeks, but she welcomed it. It cleared her mind, sharpened her focus. Across the parking lot, she spotted a black SUV, idling with its lights off. Her stomach knotted. Someone was watching. She returned inside quickly, bolting the door. Jake looked up, instantly alert. Deborah whispered, "We're not alone." Jake's eyes darkened. He drew the curtain shut. Then the clock just sped up. Emily woke with a weak smile, unaware of the SUV, unaware of the danger swelling around them. "Mom," she murmured, her voice soft as paper, "thank you for coming. I thought I was all alone." Deborah sat beside her, taking her hand. "You'll never be alone again, I promise." Her daughter drifted back to sleep, but Deborah remained awake long into the night, her mind hammering with plans and fears. The Whitlocks had underestimated her once. That mistake had ended on Christmas Eve. Now she was ready. The storm was gathering, and Deborah Harris would be its eye. The morning sun rose weakly over Boise, painting the snowbanks with a dull gold that did nothing to chase away the chill. Deborah stood at the motel window, arms folded across her chest, her broad frame blocking the pale light. She hadn't slept. Every nerve in her body buzzed, waiting for the next blow. She knew the Whitlocks would not stay silent after last night. They had reputations to protect, and Deborah had struck them where it hurt most, in public, in front of their carefully curated image of perfection. Behind her, Emily stirred in bed, groaning softly. Deborah turned, softening her expression. "Morning, baby. How are you feeling?" Emily blinked groggily, her lips cracked, her curls tangled against the pillow. "Better, warmer, but my chest feels heavy." She coughed, then winced. "What if Ryan comes? What if he takes me back?" Deborah perched on the bed, stroking her daughter's arm. "He won't, not while I'm breathing." But even as she spoke, a sharp knock rattled the door. Deborah's pulse spiked. She motioned for Emily to stay still, then crossed the room. "Who is it?" "Boise Police Department." "Open up." Deborah's stomach dropped. She cracked the door, the chain still latched. Two officers stood outside, uniforms crisp, expressions unreadable. One held a clipboard. "Ma'am, we received a report of a kidnapping," the taller officer said. "We need to speak with Emily Whitlock." Deborah's throat went dry. "They moved faster than I thought." She forced steel into her voice. "There's no kidnapping. Emily is my daughter. She came with me willingly." The officer's gaze flicked past her, toward Emily visible on the bed. "Mrs. Whitlock, do you wish to return to your husband?" Emily's eyes widened, panic flooding her features. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Deborah could almost see the war in her daughter's mind, the terror of betraying Ryan's family versus the desperation to escape. Finally, Emily whispered, "No, I want to stay with my mom." The officers exchanged a glance. The one with the clipboard sighed, scribbled something, then handed Deborah a slip of paper. "Court summons." The Whitlocks filed an emergency petition. "You'll need to appear before Judge Harper in 48 hours. They turned and left, their boots crunching in the snow. Deborah locked the door, her hands trembling. She read the paper claims of emotional instability, neglect, interference in marriage, lies written in legal ink. She pressed the paper against her thigh, fighting the urge to tear it to shreds. Jake entered a moment later, carrying 2 coffees. He froze at the sight of Deborah's face. "What happened?" "They're dragging us to court," she muttered. 2 days. Jake cursed under his breath. "That's their game. Fast, brutal, and public. They'll paint Emily as unfit, you as hysterical, and themselves as saints. It's how they've always won." Deborah set the paper on the table with a slam. "Then we don't let them win. We fight." The next 48 hours blurred into frantic preparation. Jake arranged meetings with a sympathetic social worker, dug through financial records, and called in favors from old friends who owed him. Deborah focused on Emily, keeping her calm, feeding her soup, whispering reminders that she was loved, worthy, not broken. But beneath it all, fear gnawed at her. The Whitlocks had money, they had influence, and they had already planted seeds of doubt the night before the hearing. Deborah found Emily curled in the motel bathroom, clutching her knees. "Mom," she whispered, "what if the judge believes them? What if I'm forced to go back?" Deborah knelt, wrapping her daughter in her arms. "Then we appeal. We fight again. We never stop. Do you hear me? You're not alone in this." Emily buried her face against her mother's shoulder. For the first time, Deborah felt the faint tremor of hope in her daughter's body. Fragile, but alive. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and stale air. Deborah sat at the plaintiff's table, her wide frame tense in the uncomfortable chair. Emily sat beside her, dressed in a simple cardigan, her face pale but determined. Jake hovered in the back, a silent anchor. Across the aisle, the Whitlocks were a tableau of wealth and poise. Evelyn's pearls gleamed, Gregory's suit was pressed to perfection, Abigail smirked faintly, and Ryan looked polished. Remorse painted carefully onto his features. Their attorney, a slick man in a tailored gray suit, shuffled papers with confidence. Judge Harper entered, a gavel strike silencing the room. "We're here to address the petition filed by the Whitlock family regarding the well-being of Emily Whitlock." The attorney rose, his voice smooth as oil. "Your Honor, my clients only want what's best for Emily. Unfortunately, her mother, Deborah Harris, has interfered recklessly, endangering Emily's stability. Emily has a history of mental fragility, well-documented therapy visits, depressive episodes, even suicidal ideation. My clients have cared for her tirelessly, but Mrs. Harris has now abducted her, further destabilizing her condition." Deborah gripped the table, fury bubbling. Lies rolled off his tongue like scripture, each one twisting the truth into something grotesque. When her turn came, she stood, her voice shaking but strong. "Your Honor, what they call care is cruelty. On Christmas Eve, they left my daughter outside in freezing weather as punishment. I found her trembling lips blue, while they laughed by the fire. That's not stability, that's abuse." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, but the attorney smirked. An emotional story, but unsupported by evidence. The judge turned to Emily. "Mrs. Whitlock, do you feel safe with your husband and his family?" Emily's hand shook as she clutched Deborah's arm. Her lips quivered. The room held its breath. At last, she spoke. "No, I don't. They hurt me. I want to be with my mom." Whispers erupted in the gallery. Evelyn's face stiffened. Ryan's jaw clenched. The attorney sputtered, but the judge held up a hand. "Enough. I'll review the evidence and testimony. For now, Mrs. Whitlock will remain with her mother until a full hearing." Deborah exhaled, tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a foothold. She squeezed Emily's hand. "We're not done, baby, but we're winning." Across the aisle, Evelyn leaned close to Ryan, her eyes glinting like knives. Deborah didn't need to hear the words to know the truth. The Whitlocks were far from finished. Retaliation had only just begun. The motel room had become both sanctuary and cage. Deborah paced the narrow strip of carpet between the bed and the dresser, her nerves raw from the court battle. Though Judge Harper had granted them temporary relief, she knew it was just that, temporary. The Whitlocks weren't retreating, they were regrouping. Emily sat at the table, sketching absent-mindedly on the back of the court summons. She drew small, fractured line shapes that never quite became whole. Deborah wanted to take the pen away, to banish the shadows that lived in her daughter's hands, but she didn't. Emily needed a release, even if it was through jagged drawings. Jake knocked and entered with a brown paper bag of takeout. He set it on the table, his face taut. "We need to talk." Deborah's stomach sank. "What now?" He pulled a folded newspaper from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. The headline screamed, "Local family smeared in court by embittered ex-wife." Beneath it, a glossy photo of Evelyn and Ryan Whitlock beaming at a charity gala. The article painted Deborah as unstable, vindictive, and manipulative. Emily was described as troubled, vulnerable, and easily influenced by her mother's bitterness. Deborah's chest tightened. "They're controlling the narrative." Jake nodded grimly. "The Whitlocks own half the media in this county. They'll spin every detail until you're the villain. By the time the full hearing comes, the jury pool will already see you as toxic." Emily's pen slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the table. "So they'll win, no matter what." Deborah crouched beside her daughter, gripping her hands. "Not if we fight smarter. They want to isolate us, make us doubt ourselves, but we know the truth." Jake leaned against the wall, his jaw working. "I've been digging into their finances. There are irregularities, shell donations, money funneled through their foundation. If we expose that, it won't just save Emily, it'll burn their whole empire." Deborah hesitated. "That's dangerous." He met her eyes. "So is going into court blind. You know they'll come after you personally. They'll dig into your past, your parenting, your weakest moments. We need leverage." That night, Deborah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought of Christmas Eve's past, Emily's laughter as they decorated a lopsided tree, the smell of cinnamon rolls in the oven. Simple, fragile memories that now felt like stolen treasures. The Whitlocks had nearly crushed them, and Deborah refused to let that happen again. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Asterisk, you don't know what you're up against. Walk away before it's too late. Asterisk. Her hands trembled as she read it. The Whitlocks weren't just fighting in court or in the press. They were reaching into her private life, reminding her that they could touch her at any time. She didn't wake Emily. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the snowdrift under the parking lot lights. Shadows stretched across the ice, long and menacing. For the first time, Deborah wondered if she had underestimated the danger. 2 days later, Jake returned with a flash drive. He placed it on the table like it was dynamite. This is it. Proof of fraud, tax evasion, and hush money. Enough to ruin them. Deborah stared at it. Where did you get this? An old contact in their accounting firm. He risked everything to get it out. But if we use it, the Whitlocks will know we've gone to war. Emily looked between them, her voice barely a whisper. What if they come after me? Deborah squeezed her daughter's hand. Then they'll have to go through me. That evening, the motel phone rang. Deborah answered cautiously. Evelyn's voice coiled through the line, smooth and venomous. You think you've won, Deborah. All you've done is dig a deeper grave. Emily belongs to us. She always has. If you try to destroy us, we'll take her so far you'll never see her again. Deborah's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. She's not yours. She never was. And I won't let you hurt her again. A soft chuckle. We'll see. The line went dead. Deborah set the receiver down slowly. Fear clawed at her throat, but beneath it was something fierce. She turned to Jake and Emily, her voice low but unwavering. We don't hide anymore. We expose them. The chapter closed with Deborah standing at the threshold of decision. The Whitlocks had thrown down their gauntlet, weaving lies in courtrooms, headlines, and whispered threats. But Deborah had something stronger: truth, love, and a mother's refusal to surrender. Shadows gathered around them, but for the first time, Deborah felt the fire in her chest burn brighter than the darkness. The storm was coming in. She was ready to meet it head-on. Snow battered Boise like 1,000 tiny fists, rattling the motel windows as Deborah braced herself for the fight she knew was coming. The Whitlocks had shown their tit-smear campaigns, threats, manipulation, but Deborah wasn't just defending Emily anymore. She was preparing to dismantle everything the Whitlocks had built. Jake paced the room, running a hand through his graying hair. The evidence we have is enough to bring in federal investigators, but once it goes public, there's no going back. They'll unleash hell. Deborah glanced at Emily, who was curled on the bed under a blanket, her face pale but resolute. They already unleashed hell. We're just learning to survive it. Jake exhaled sharply. Then, tomorrow, we go to the press. The next morning, Deborah and Jake met with a local journalist, Claire Ramirez, at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Claire was young but sharp, her notebook brimming with scribbles. Her eyes widened as she clicked through the files Jake had pulled. This is explosive, Claire whispered. Fraudulent donations, tax evasion, payouts to silence employees. If this checks out, the Whitlocks could face prison. Deborah leaned forward. Just promise me one thing. When this goes live, make sure Emily's name isn't dragged through the mud. Claire nodded firmly. The focus will be on them, not her. By evening, the article had gone live. The headline blazed across every feed. Boise powerhouse family faces fraud allegations. Screenshots of bank transfers, emails, and doctored charity reports spread like wildfire. For the first time, the Whitlocks' perfect image cracked. Inside the motel, Deborah watched the story unfold on television. Emily sat beside her, her hand gripping Deborah's tightly. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered maybe this was the beginning of freedom, but then her phone buzzed. Another unknown text. Asterisk, you made a mistake. Now she pays. Asterisk, Deborah's blood ran cold. She leapt up, scanning the room, as if shadows themselves could leap from the walls. Jake grabbed the phone, his jaw tightening. They're rattled. That means it's working, but it also means they'll hit back harder. The hit came faster than expected. That night, as Deborah tucked Emily into bed, the motel fire alarm shrieked. Smoke seeped under the door. Panic surged through her chest. She yanked Emily out of bed, shouting for Jake. The three of them stumbled into the hallway, where other guests were already rushing out, coughing and covering their mouths. Outside, snow still fell, blanketing the chaos in eerie silence. Fire trucks wailed in the distance. Deborah clutched Emily close, her body shielding her daughter. Through the blur of smoke and snow, she caught sight of a black SUV idling at the edge of the lot. The windows were tinted, But Deborah didn't need to see faces. She knew who it was. The SUV peeled away before the fire crews arrived. The blaze was contained quickly, but the damage was clear. The Whitlocks had escalated from threats to action. The following morning, Deborah sat with Emily at the diner, across from the courthouse, their breakfast untouched. Emily's hands shook as she sipped her cocoa. "Mom, they're never going to stop, no matter what we do." Deborah cupped her daughter's cheek, forcing her to meet her eyes. "They want us to believe that, but the truth is they're scared. And when people like them get scared, they get sloppy." Jake slid into the booth, his expression grim but determined. "He's right. We've got them cornered. Now it's time to go for the throat." That afternoon, the second court hearing convened. The Whitlocks arrived in full force, polished and furious, their lawyer armed with counterarguments. Evelyn's pearls gleamed like icicles, and Ryan wore the mask of the grieving husband betrayed by his wife's rebellion. But this time, Deborah wasn't trembling. She stood tall, her voice steady as she spoke. "Your Honor, the Whitlocks have portrayed themselves as protectors, but behind the curtain, they are predators. They exploit the vulnerable, including my daughter, for their image. And now, the truth is out." Jake submitted the financial evidence, Claire's article as corroboration, and sworn statements from former employees who had come forward since the story broke. The courtroom buzzed with shock. The Whitlocks' lawyer sputtered, trying to dismiss it as fabricated. But the judge's stern gaze told everyone in the room that the tide was turning. When court adjourned for the day, Deborah and Emily stepped outside into the snow. For once, it didn't feel like an enemy. It felt cleansing, like a silent witness to their survival. Emily leaned into her mother's side, whispering, "You're winning, Mom, for both of us." Deborah kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart swelling with pride. "No, baby, we're winning." But as they walked toward Jake's car, Deborah couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Somewhere out there, the Whitlocks were regrouping again. The storm had broken. Yes, but storms often left wreckage in their wake. And Deborah knew the final battle was still ahead. The courthouse buzzed like a hive. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing against the gray winter sky. Headlines screamed about the Whitlocks' fraud, corruption, betrayal. What had once been whispers in the dark were now shouted across every newspaper and television channel in Idaho. Deborah stepped from Jake's car, her heavy coat wrapped tight against the snow-laden wind. Beside her, Emily clung to her arm. The girl's curls were tucked beneath a knitted cap, her brown skin pale but her eyes burning with quiet resolve. Deborah felt the weight of the moment press against her chest. Today wasn't just about custody, it was about truth, survival, and freedom. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. The Whitlocks sat across the aisle, a family of statues carved from arrogance and fear. Evelyn's face was rigid, her pearls like a choke chain around her throat. Gregory glowered, his fists clenched. Ryan stared at Emily, his expression a twisted mixture of longing and rage. Abigail whispered furiously into their lawyer's ear, her perfectly manicured nails tapping like daggers on the table. Judge Harper entered, his gavel striking once. The room fell into silence. "Today," he began, "we will hear the final arguments in the case of Whitlock versus Harris. This court has been presented with grave allegations. It is my duty to determine both the well-being of Emily Whitlock and whether criminal proceedings against the Whitlock family should be recommended." A ripple of shock passed through the gallery. Deborah's heart leaped. Criminal proceedings. At last, the weight was shifting. The Whitlock's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth but trembling at the edges. "Your Honor, the accusations against my clients are nothing but vindictive fabrications from a bitter ex. The so-called evidence is circumstantial, illegally obtained, and presented in the most malicious light. The Whitlocks are pillars of this community. To drag them through the mud based on questionable testimony is not only reckless, it is cruel." Deborah watched Evelyn's eyes flicker. For the first time, there was fear there, barely hidden beneath the facade. When her turn came, Deborah stood slowly. The room leaned toward her. She wasn't a lawyer. She didn't have polished rhetoric, but she had truth. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady. "For years, the Whitlocks have hidden behind money and influence. They've built their empire on intimidation and control. My daughter was not nurtured in their home. She was punished, silenced, and left in the cold. On Christmas Eve, she was shivering outside while they sat by the fire. If I hadn't found her, she might not be alive today." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Deborah continued, her gaze fixed on the judge. "I am not perfect. I don't have wealth or power, but I have love. I have fought for Emily's life every single day since she was born, and I will not stop fighting, not against lies, not against threats, not against anyone. My daughter deserves safety. She deserves freedom. And so does every person who's ever been crushed by families like the Whitlocks. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Judge Harper reviewed the files once more, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until every heartbeat felt like thunder. Finally, he spoke. This court rules in favor of Deborah Harris. Full custody of Emily Whitlock is hereby awarded to her mother. The courtroom erupted, some in cheers, others in outrage. Evelyn shot to her feet, her face twisted with fury. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice carrying across the room. Judge Harper's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Furthermore, based on the evidence presented, I am referring the financial records of the Whitlock family to the State Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation." Evelyn staggered back as though struck. Ryan buried his face in his hands. Abigail went pale. For once, the Whitlocks had no words, no control. The walls they had built around themselves were collapsing brick by brick. Afterward, Deborah and Emily stepped into the cold afternoon light, reporters clamoring around them. Flashbulbs popped, voices shouted, but Deborah kept her focus on her daughter's hand in hers. Emily looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're free, Mom," she whispered. Deborah smiled, her throat tight. "Yes, baby, we are." Jake joined them at the curb, clapping a hand on Deborah's shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood up to them, and you won." Deborah shook her head. "We won. Together." Snow drifted lazily from the sky, soft and pure, settling on their coats. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a weight pressing them down. It felt like a blessing, washing the world clean. That night, back at a small rental apartment far from the Whitlocks' reach, Deborah tucked Emily into bed. She lingered by the door, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep. The bruises of the past would take time to fade, but healing had finally begun. Deborah stepped into the living room, sinking into the couch with exhaustion. The fight was over for now, but in her heart, she knew something unshakable. No empire, no threat, no shadow of betrayal could ever break the bond between a mother and her child, and that bond had become their victory. The storm had passed, and in its wake, Deborah and Emily found not just survival, but the promise of a brighter dawn.